Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Emergency Home Learning Summit presented by Learning Revolution. I'm very sad for the circumstances, but I'm happy to participate in supporting students and families during this sort of strange time and scary time. I think the word emergency tells us everything we need to know, no matter how we've been learning or how we've been schooling. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before I introduce myself. My name is Tasha Ring. I'm founder and director at Meridian Learning, and I'm here to talk to you today about how to start a microschool. The word founder and director at Meridian Learning probably doesn't mean much to you, but I have been a microschool leader and teacher for 12 years. This is my 13th school year leading a microschool, serving as director, and serving as a microschool teacher. So I'm in the classroom every day, helping to build and sustain small learning communities has been and continues to be my life's work. I've never actually tried to do a talk about microschools in 30 minutes, but I've talked a lot about microschools, especially in the last few months, so I'm feeling up for the job. I didn't rehearse this talk because I really want to speak candidly. I prefer answering direct questions, but this is what we've got, so we'll make the best of it. But I did want to give credit where credit is due. We have a 3-hour microschool course, and I did take some content from that course. So I want to give credit to Jody and Anne and Carol, who are the presenters in that course. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about microschooling and introduce the idea if you haven't heard of it. Talk about what a microschool is and does, but more importantly, how to start one, which is, I'm assuming, the reason that you're tuning into this particular talk. I think someone else has done a talk about the difference between microschools and pandemic pods, and there are certainly some really significant differences. There's some similarities as well. Might be said that a microschool is a pod, or a pod is a microschool, kind of like square, rectangle, right? But a microschool, microschooling has been around for a while. The fact that I've been doing it for 12 years, almost 13 now, should be an indicator. There are a lot of other microschools out there, not enough of them, but there's certainly more than a few. And I think there are a lot of microschools out there that are not necessarily calling themselves microschools. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. 4 years ago, Meridian Learning, collaboratively with the members of our grassroots microschool community, developed this definition of a microschool: a purposefully small school, typically with the following characteristics: led by a trained professional or group of professionals, offers flexible programming, consists of mixed age class or classes with 15 students or less, guided by the same teacher, focused on meaningful, sustainable, whole student learning. That piece is really important. Some other words used to describe a microschool might include cottage school, one-room schoolhouse, co-op, hybrid school, blended learning center, parenting program, alternative school. So here you go. There are a lot of microschools out there calling themselves something else. And one of the things that we've been trying to do for the last 4 years is sort of get everyone on not necessarily the same page, but a similar enough page that we can propel this movement forward a little bit more. And certainly the pandemic has shined a light on microschooling, and we appreciate that. I think that it's also created some confusion about what a microschool is and does, and what it looks like to start one and sustain one. So again, I'm really happy to be here talking about microschooling and how to start a microschool. I want to share something about microschooling as it pertains to the flexible programming piece. And that is that most microschools are not fulfilling the compulsory schooling requirements. So a microschool is not, it's not a public school. at least not yet. And it's typically, operating in sort of the alternative school sector. Most of them are private schools, and their goal is not to fulfill compulsory schooling requirements. Now, there are some microschools that were set up to fulfill the compulsory schooling requirements in their state, and Highlands Microschool in Denver is one of those schools. That's not why they were set up, but their school does fulfill compulsory schooling requirements. And Anne, who is the director of Highlands, gave us permission to share this photo of her beautiful school, their beautiful school, which I understand they took a building that was already there and completely renovated it completely. I remember following along on social media when they were building the school and doing the renovations. And now they have this beautiful micro school in an urban neighborhood in Denver, complete with a bell tower. So I think it helps to see some photographs of some micro schools already in existence. They look really different, but they also share some things, some characteristics as well. The next micro school is one of Meridian Learning's micro lab schools in Cincinnati, called Meridian Microschool, and this microschool is in a commercial storefront. Unlike Highlands Microschool, where they purchased the building, Meridian is in a leased space, and most microschools are in spaces that are being rented, if not in people's homes. So a lot of microschools are start in people's homes, which is something similar to what's happening now with the pandemic learning pods. People are setting up these pods in their garages and tree houses and backyards, and you can certainly start a microschool that way. But when we're looking at microschools, we're looking at schools that are designed to be permanent. And there's quite a bit of infrastructure that is involved in establishing a microschool. I think that a lot of people realized when they were trying to set up pandemic pods that there's a lot you still have to do, even to do something that is designed to be temporary. And we see a lot of people right now, doing the virtual option through their local school district, and maybe realizing that there are some challenges. It's not what they thought it would be, and are coming over to this idea of doing something more like homeschooling, which I think is wonderful, because microschooling evolved from homeschooling, and it's really designed to be sort of a combination of a nice balance, nice healthy balance between private schooling and homeschooling. So there are just a couple examples of microschools that are in existence, and we're hoping to see more of them. So let's dive into how to start a microschool. First, I want to share what not to do, and that's, don't try to replicate public school. Again, going back to what I just shared about pandemic pods, and trying to recreate the classroom in a public school. That's not what microschools aim to do. Even those microschools that seek to fulfill compulsory schooling requirements, they're not trying to replicate what already exists. They're also not trying to meet the needs of everyone. Certainly, we understand in the microschool community that that we can't do that. And the wonderful thing about one of the wonderful things about microschools is that you can meet the needs of your community and a very specific group of people. But being a single school single microschool and trying to meet the needs of everyone is very challenging. Another piece of information that we always share when we are talking about starting a microschool is that we do not recommend starting without a lawyer, an accountant, and a mentor who has started and successfully run a microschool for a significant period of time. You can start a microschool and figure it out as you go. There's a lot of trial and error, and I did a lot of that 13 years ago, and that's one of the reasons that Meridian Learning exists, especially our membership piece and our online course offerings and resources, because there wasn't a lot of information out there about how to not only start a microschool, but how to keep one going. And now it's wonderful that there are people out there who are serving as mentors. That's what I've done a lot of in the last 4 to 5 years, especially, is mentored new microschool teachers and new microschool leaders. And it's really important, I think, to have a mentor. You wouldn't go into any new business venture without seeking advice from people who've done it before. And microschooling, starting a microschool, is much the same. So video killed the radio star, expectations killed the prospective microschool leader. Yes. I think expectations are tricky things. A lot of people come into thinking about starting a microschool with wonderful ideas, and they're seeking to change the system, or really wishing to do something different than is already being done. But then they have all these ideas, expectations about what's going to happen. And again, a microschool is not unlike a lot of other businesses. Most of them are not successful. I think it's something like 90% of new businesses fail. In my experience, it's a similar statistic for microschools. So my recommendation is to keep an open mind and try to manage your expectations as much as possible. So the first subtopic, I guess, of this talk is the legal and financial piece. And there's a lot that can be said about legal and financial. And I am not a lawyer, and I'm not an accountant, and that's why one of our recommendations is to find a lawyer in your state, and find an accountant. Doesn't necessarily have to be in your state, but who can advise you on setting up your microschool in a way that is in compliance with the law in your state, and in agreement with your finances and budget. When I started my first microschool back in 2008, I sought out an attorney who was the father of one of my students. So he had a really clear understanding of what it was that I was doing, because he was a client. And that may be difficult for you to find someone who has that kind of direct knowledge of what it is that you're doing. But as much as possible, find someone who has a good understanding of what it is that you're aiming to do. Most microschools are set up as LLCs, and I think the reason for that is pretty clear. It's less expensive, and it's quicker. Some of them are nonprofits, and there are benefits to being a nonprofit. You can find more information about that other places, and so I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But the bare minimum is that you really need an EIN and a business checking account. Much like any other business, again, microschooling, setting up a microschool, it is a business. And And so you need the things that you would need if you were starting up any other business, any other small business. We talked about the importance of finding an attorney who really understands what you're doing. I wanted to share a couple resources here. HSLDA is a homeschool legal resource, and while microschooling is not the same as homeschooling, it's evolved from homeschooling, and there are some similarities. And there really aren't a lot of legal resources out there for homeschoolers. I'm hoping that will change also here in the immediate future and long-term future. And Homeschool CPA, Carol Topp, is a homeschool financial resource. She also has a lot of knowledge around microschooling because she's been part of our grassroots microschool community for the last few years. We're going to move on to the marketing piece. Bare minimum of marketing is that you need a Facebook page. Social media is very important, as we all know. There are a lot of tiny schools that no one knows about, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that social media is not something that has been made a priority, or there's just not time for it. But setting up a Facebook page is fairly easy, fairly quick and easy, even if you don't like Facebook, like me. I still consider it a necessary piece of marketing. Tell a compelling story. Right now, I think prospective families aren't necessarily interested so much in the story as they are just an option that meets the needs of their family where they are. But telling your story is important in marketing, and I think it's important to make clear who you are, what it is you're trying to do, where you are, and the details regarding your program. Make those clear from the start. And I think that's one thing that is often missing when microschool leaders or group of leaders are starting up a microschool. They aren't very clear themselves. They're not very clear themselves on what it is that they're aiming to do, and so they can't be clear in marketing and in conversations with prospective families. So I do recommend taking your time and gathering those pieces of information and summarizing them in a way that it's clear to families what it is, who you are, and what it is that you're doing. When it comes to microschooling, connections matter. This is people-driven work, and it cannot be accomplished by technology alone. I think we see right now, especially, there are a number of tech startups who are working to maybe scale this particular, kind of tiny school model. And in my experience, working with families every day, microschool families, and talking to prospective microschool families, they're really kind of turned off by that because they want to know you, and they want to get to know you, and they want to feel confident in your abilities, and again, this is a really uncertain time, so those connections matter. They always matter, but especially now. One way to elevate your marketing is from the start is by branding, having a logo, starting a professional website. Those are all ways to present your microschool in a way that makes clear that you're serious about what it is that you're doing, and you're in it for the long haul. But bare minimum is a Facebook page. Word of mouth is very important in the private sector, and a lot of that word of mouth happens on social media. Professional affiliation, that's really something that is near and dear to my heart. I think more microschools need to consider this. A lot of us started our schools and we were the only ones doing it where we were, and we are just very independent and autonomous by nature, by design. But I think that collaborating is really key to moving the movement forward and sustaining it long term. So I think it's important to think about what kinds of professional affiliations you might want to have, and how those can help you long term, and how those can help the greater movement, the greater microschool movement long term. Funding. So now we get down to the money piece, and that's one question I've been asked many times is how much money does it cost to start a microschool, and where can I find the money if I don't have it? So funding through tuition is the most common and the easiest way to build your microschool quickly, or at least more quickly. I recommend a registration deposit, and just like other private schools, microschooling is, the success of a microschool hinges on the investment. Your investment as a microschool leader, or someone who's helping to start a microschool, and the investment of your family. So I've said many times that it takes a special kind of person to lead a microschool. It takes a special group of families to sustain one. And that investment is really important, not just the financial investment, but the overall investment. There are lots of ways to try to accommodate families. Some of those ways are through sliding scale tuition, offering financial aid, scholarships. You could consider scholarships once the school is stable. That's not often something that microschools do in the early days, unless they have a lot of money, a lot of capital coming in. Some people do have a lot of money to start, but you don't need a lot of money. You can use what you have, and using what you have, looking at what infrastructure already exists. That's why a lot of people, when they're considering starting a microschool, are thinking of ways that they can do it from their own home. Now there are legal things to consider around that, zoning and a number of other things to consider. But it is important to look at what you already have that you can use. When I started my first microschool, I made almost all of the materials. A lot of the materials were donated by my mother, who had helped start microschool, and had also homeschooled my younger sister. And then I made the rest of the materials. My husband built almost all of the furniture. So you don't need a lot of money, but if time is money, there's really no substitute, because it is time-consuming work. I don't know a lot of microschool leaders that have had a lot of money to start, but they have had time where they carved out the time. And it comes to starting any new business, right? You are going to accept the fact that it's probably going to take quite a bit of time, and this is yet another example of a small business that takes time. So, in summary, these are steps that I recommend taking if you're considering starting a microschool. You're going to start first with your vision, mission, and mantra. and really try to have a clear understanding of what it is that you're trying to do and what your microschool is going to look like, and not just the big picture, but what that looks like on a daily basis. What kind of curriculum you're going to use, what are your hours, and what are you charging, and then the bigger picture is your your mission statement, and because it all kind of comes back to that. What are your specific goals, and who are the people that you're trying to reach, and then you should get your legal and financial ducks in a row. And sometimes that takes a while, but sometimes it doesn't. Again, if you're looking to start a microschool and you decide to pursue the LLC, that can happen fairly quickly. And maybe you already have a group of families that are interested in attending your microschool. So then the marketing piece is made easier. But if you don't, marketing your school via social media and among the people you already know is a great way to get started. Even if you have a group of families and you're just looking for a teacher, it really is important to have a school presence on social media and to network as much as possible. Use tuition to build capital, utilize existing infrastructure. Do you have materials? Do you have a space? And if not, how long is it going to take to acquire those things? Manage your expectations. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So don't expect your microschool to have a sort of perfect operations from day one. It doesn't typically work that way, and there is going to be some trial and error. And if you're really committed to the microschool being successful, and you're willing to make sacrifices and keep an open mind, look at alternative ways of doing things, then your likelihood of being successful is much greater. I just want to close with a quote that speaks to me, has spoken to me for a while. Go confidently in the direction of your dreams, live the life you've imagined. I know I've chatted with a lot of traditional classroom teachers in the last few months especially, and they're really looking for ways to stay in the classroom and continue to bring joy to their students and be joyful themselves. And I just want to speak to those people directly and say that it is possible to be in the classroom and to continue to be joyful and continue to bring joy. And microschooling is a great way to do that. So I do hope that through this process of learning at home right now and discovering different ways of doing that, more people will discover microschooling as a really not only viable option, but as a superb and exceptional option for today and for the future. And we call microschooling 21st century learning, because we really feel that while it is the sort of the return of the one-room schoolhouse, we are taking those things that worked really well a long time ago and repurposing and rebuilding them for the 21st century. And we know it works because we've been doing it for a long time. And we hope more people will join us in the grassroots microschool community. So I thank you for joining me for this talk today on how to start a microschool, and I hope to see you soon. in our microschool community. Thanks.